In the dying light of an October afternoon, the pine trees of Carver County stood tall and motionless, their shadows stretching long across the cracked asphalt of Route 12. It was 1989, the year the leaves clung to the branches a little longer, and the wind whispered through the woods like it had a secret to keep. The town of Danvers Hollow was quiet, settled deep in the rural folds of the Midwest, where news traveled slow and people even slower. That day, 20 children boarded Bus 47 after school, just like they did every afternoon. They sat in the same seats they always had, with the same worn backpacks and scribbled notebooks, shoes muddy from recess and hands still sticky from lunch. The driver, a man known only as Mr. Dale to most, wore a faded cap low over his eyes and kept one hand on the wheel, the other drumming the steering column with slow, patient rhythm. The bus rumbled away from Hartwell Elementary at 3:11 p.m., turned left past the water tower, and disappeared into the tree-lined corridor locals called Hollow Creek Stretch, a dense path of road where reception vanished, and headlights were needed even before sunset. The parents waited. At 3:50, they checked the clocks. At 4:15, a few called neighbors. By 5:00, the school receptionist had dialed the sheriff's office. No one had seen the bus since it passed the county gas station at 3:18. There were no calls, no tire marks, no wreckage, just silence. That night, the town came out with flashlights and hounds. Volunteers lined the woods, calling names into the wind. Deputies fanned out across every gravel road, searching for skid marks, glass, broken limbs, anything. But the woods offered nothing. The bus had simply ceased to exist. The town mourned in confusion. 20 seats. 19 families wept. One refused. The Clarks, whose daughter Sarah had always taken the aisle seat near the emergency exit, insisted she was still alive. She was a quiet girl, wrote in a red notebook constantly, never caused trouble. Her mother said she'd felt something strange that day. She said the wind stopped for a moment when she turned onto the porch at dusk, like something ancient had stepped between her and the sky. But grief does strange things to memory, and in time, the names of the missing became a list, and the story of Bus 47 became a cautionary tale passed between generations. Then, in the spring of 2009, a survey team from the Department of Environmental Restoration was dispatched to the Pine Row tract just north of the county line. Their task was simple: clear brush for a future nature trail. By noon, one of the bulldozers had struck metal beneath a thick layer of earth. They thought it was an old septic tank. It wasn't. The yellow paint still clung to the steel frame beneath the dirt, letters faint but unmistakable. District 87, Bus 47. Inside, the windows were opaque with mold and time. The driver's seat was crushed. Every row held bones small, delicate, arranged as though still sitting upright. 19 skeletons. One seat, third from the back, driver's side, was empty. On the floor beneath it, a red notebook lay sealed in a thin layer of mud and decay, pages warped but mostly intact. The name scrawled across the cover in neat black ink, S. Clark. The discovery reignited everything. Local authorities reopened the case within days, but the forensic team found no trace of the missing girl. Not a tooth, not a hair. Her seat was untouched, her belongings absent. The bus had been buried intentionally, packed under filled dirt from the 1995 flood diversion project that was never completed. Someone knew it was there. Someone had meant for it never to be found, and someone had left one child's seat empty. Detective Lynn Marlowe, reassigned to Danvers Hollow after a department reorganization in Chicago, was handed the reopened case by a reluctant sheriff. She'd read the files on the plane. She didn't expect much. Cold cases never led anywhere. But when she flipped through the photos, something caught her eye. A margin note in Sarah Clark's journal. "He whistles when we turn off the road. That's how I know it's not the same route." Marlowe frowned. Route 12 didn't have any detours. Not then. Not now. At the evidence locker, she held the red notebook in her gloved hands. Most of the entries were benign. Notes about classmates, sketches of trees, math problems. But halfway through, the tone shifted. Today, the windows turned black. I tried to open mine, and Mr. Dale yelled. His voice was different. They say, it's not a road anymore. It's a path. A lesson. The final page was torn out. All that remained was an indentation, barely legible under forensic light. 5 words. I didn't stay on board. Marlowe sat with the discovery longer than she'd expected. Not just because of the case, but because something felt unfinished. 20 years ago, 19 children had died. But the girl who had escaped, if she had escaped, had never made herself known. Why? And why had the bus been buried with such precision? Who had the resources, the time, the motive? Outside, the wind shifted again. Same pattern, same silence, as if the forest was holding its breath. The forest hadn't changed in 20 years. Trees still leaned too far over the roadside like they were listening. The underbrush remained thick, damp, and indifferent. And the silence so dense it had weight hadn't softened with time. The road leading into Marrow Creek had once been paved. Now it cracked beneath dead leaves and creeping moss, the county long since abandoning maintenance after the town's population dipped below 100. But for Detective Cala Moren, recently reassigned from Atlanta PD's Special Cases Unit, the road was anything but forgotten. She drove slowly, tires crunching over gravel, window down just enough to hear the birds, or more precisely, to notice when they stopped. The forest grew still around mile marker 11, the same stretch noted in the original reports where the bus was last seen. Her arrival wasn't public. No press conference, no flashing lights. Just a single unmarked cruiser sliding into the clearing behind the temporary forensic tent. A uniformed deputy with tired eyes met her halfway down the slope. He offered no greeting, only a nod and a gesture toward the site. We didn't find them all, he said quietly, but we found enough. Calla stepped out and scanned the scene. The trench was 15 feet deep, carved like a wound into the hillside. The back end of a rusted school bus jutted from the clay. Its frame collapsed inward, windows caked with soil and silence. She took it in slowly. This was not an accident site. It was deliberate. The placement, the burial depth, the way the bus roof had been flattened just enough to avoid detection but not destroyed. Whoever buried it wanted it hidden, not gone. Inside the tent, forensics had laid out the remains of partial skeletons in labeled evidence trays, children's shoes preserved in vacuum seals, fragments of clothing too small and faded to be anything but cruel reminders. 17 confirmed, 2 pending DNA verification. That left 1 unaccounted for. Calla pulled out the archival files she'd spent the flight reviewing. Newspaper clippings, interview transcripts, a photocopy of a note found taped to a farmhouse door just days after the children vanished. It read, "They were taken, not lost, and the trees remember." Most had written it off as local folklore, rural grief shaping itself into myth. But there was something about the phrasing that lingered. Taken implied intent. Remember implied witnesses. Calla turned to the deputy. Was there anything else uncovered inside? He nodded slowly, his hand tightening around a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a cloth-bound notebook, warped by moisture, the front cover scrawled with a name, K.E. Rowans. The same name that appeared in the original attendance roll for that day seat 9, 3rd row, window side. She flipped carefully through the pages. Most were blank or smeared with age, but a handful had survived. The handwriting was small, tight, and erratic. The kind of script produced by someone trying to write without being noticed. One page, scrawled in shaky ink, read, "The driver said we weren't going home. He smiled too long. The road bent where it shouldn't have, and the shadows were wrong. I think someone else was driving." Calla reread the lines twice. Someone else. Not the driver, not the man families had trusted for years. This was the first breadcrumb, a child trying to record what couldn't be understood, what was never meant to be remembered. The wind picked up as she stepped away from the tent, carrying the scent of earth and rust and something else, something faintly sweet and unnatural. Calla paused at the edge of the trench, staring down at the bus half submerged in soil like a carcass slowly surfacing after decades underwater. The frame creaked as the last rays of light disappeared behind the tree line, and she felt it again, that presence. Not a person, not a thing, a tension. As if the forest itself had been holding something in its lungs for 20 years and was still deciding whether to exhale. She returned to her rental cabin that night, just outside Merrill Creek, where the air was thinner and the quiet less oppressive. The red notebook, the one from the Clark girl, had been digitized by forensics. She loaded the files on her laptop and began reading. Entry after entry described the ordinary: class notes, field trip drawings, stories about her parents. But then, as if something broke loose in her mind, the tone shifted. October 20, it read. Mr. Dale didn't blink the whole ride. I tried to look away, but I felt like I'd fall into his eyes. I think he's different. I think he was switched. The next few entries were smudged, the ink bled with moisture. Then, on October 6th, he whistled the song again. Same one. Always when we go past the water tower. But the tower isn't there anymore. The road after the whistle bends the wrong way. I tried to count the trees, but they keep changing. Something is hiding behind them. Kala stared at the screen, unsure whether she was reading the fragments of a traumatized child's imagination or the honest testimony of something far stranger. Trauma manifests in disjointed logic, she knew that. Children reframe horror to make it manageable. But there was consistency here. Recurring elements, symbols, patterns across two notebooks from two different children found in two different sites. The bending road, the missing landmarks, the whistling. She opened the file on the original driver, Mr. Dale, real name, Alan C. Dale, 61 at the time of disappearance, former mechanic, widower. Nothing in his background screamed anomaly. But there was one strange detail. In 1972, Dale had applied for a custodial position at a federal youth facility 3 counties over. The facility, now defunct, had once hosted a program called Behavioral Obedience Reinforcement, later shuttered after an internal audit found inconsistencies in patient records. Dale's application had been denied, but he'd listed a reference on the form M. Eller, the same name written inside the notebook beneath seat 14 in the Arlington bus, the missing child whose remains were never found. Kala froze. This wasn't a coincidence. A thread was tying these disappearances together, one that spanned counties, decades, and names thought lost. She printed everything, every page, every scan, and spread them across the table like puzzle pieces. 19 children in Danvers Hollow, 19 in Arlington, 2 buses, 2 notebooks, 1 missing child in each, and a name that surfaced like a weed through concrete. Elor. There was something else, too. On the inside back cover of the Clark notebook, written in the same faint hand but upside down, were 6 numbers, 042511. She stared at them for a long time. Not a date, a coordinate, or a code. Or maybe, just maybe, the first crack in the wall. Kala didn't sleep. Not really. She drifted in and out, head tilted against the window of the cabin's small kitchen, surrounded by papers, coffee gone cold. The woods outside groaned softly, an old house settling into itself. When she woke for good, around 5:14 a.m., the light outside was a dull gray, heavy with mist. Birds weren't singing. Nothing moved. She scanned the back cover of the Clark notebook again, the numbers printed so precisely it almost seemed mechanical. 042511, a 6-digit string. It didn't align with any known case file date, and the format was off for standard IDs. But what if it wasn't a date? She opened a coordinate conversion tool and entered the numbers as latitude and longitude. The first try yielded nonsense. But when she separated them 4.2511N, 87W, the result narrowed down to a patch of state-protected woodland southeast of Danvers Hollow, not far from a region once referred to by locals as the Sink Belt, where the limestone beneath the forest had a habit of collapsing into itself after heavy rain. She marked it. She would go there. But not alone. Back at the station, she briefed the sheriff's department. Only a handful of officers remained on staff, and fewer still remembered the original case. But one deputy, Marcus Lane, had been just out of the academy in 1989 when the first bus vanished. He remembered the Clark family. He remembered the red notebook, though it had been written off as grief-fueled hallucination at the time. And he remembered something else, the emergency call that came through the day after the bus disappeared. It was never logged, just a call picked up on an old analog radio in the county dispatch room. A child's voice, whispering. They said the forest eats the noise, but if I stay still, I can hear the real road. I can find the right bus. It had been dismissed. A prank. No recording existed. But Marcus never forgot it. The cadence, the strange choice of words. Kala took him with her when she drove to the marked coordinates. It took them 40 minutes on back roads and another 20 on foot. The forest thickened around them like a tide. GPS wavered, blinked, vanished entirely. But when they reached the point, they knew they were close. The trees bent inward, unnaturally. Their trunks twisted, bark spiraling like pulled sugar. And the smell earthy, yes, but also sterile, antiseptic, like old hospitals and rain. They found a clearing, perfectly circular. At its center, the rusted remains of what looked like a metal container, crushed flat but still distinct, burnt at the edges, embedded in the dirt. The size of a small room. No signs of life, no tracks, just silence. Marcus circled the perimeter, found a stone partially buried at the northern edge, inscribed faintly with numbers. The same 6 digits, 042511. And beneath that the word, transfer. Kala crouched near the container's side and brushed away debris. Her hand hit something sharp, a shard of red plastic. She held it up to the light and saw the faint outline of a letter, C. From a lunchbox, or a toy. Something meant for a child. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Whatever had happened here, whatever had been hidden, had roots deeper than anyone imagined. This wasn't just about one bus, one town, one child. This was about a system, one that had built roads not for transportation, but for disappearance. And someone had drawn the maps long before anyone realized they existed. They returned to town just after sundown. The trip back was quiet, neither Kala nor Marcus speaking as the cruiser hummed over cracked asphalt, headlights catching branches that reached too close to the road. It felt as though the forest was watching, but not out of curiosity, something colder, measured, like it was checking if its boundaries had been breached. Kala stopped at the diner off Main Street, the one place still open after dark in Danvers Hollow. The waitress recognized her instantly, not because they'd met, but because word had already traveled. "You're with the case," she said, pouring coffee that tasted like rust. "They say you found another bus." Kala only nodded. "They say it's the same one, just in pieces," the woman added, voice lowered, eyes darting to the lone customer in the corner booth. Kala glanced over. An old man sat hunched over scrambled eggs that had gone cold, hands unmoving. He wore a patched denim jacket with a faded patch that read, "Transit Division." Not school, not a city. Something older. When she looked again, the booth was empty. No eggs, no jacket, just steam curling from the untouched coffee cup. Back at the cabin, she combed through the files again, this time focusing not on the buses or the names, but the geography. All 3 towns, Danvers Hollow, Arlington, and a third now barely a dot on the map called Graybend, sat along an old, disused corridor labeled in county records as Route 0. Route 0 did not appear on current maps. It had been phased out in 1968, following a series of landslides and infrastructure failures. But older documents stored on microfilm in the State Archive showed that Route 0 was once part of a federal program called Educational Transport Redevelopment, a pilot plan designed to reroute students away from deteriorating infrastructure through more secure corridors. One memo stood out, dated March 1965, addressed to a logistics officer named M. Elor. It read, All transfers through Zone 7 must be logged under false routing codes. No stops, no parent contact. Students must be told alternate destinations are part of standard testing protocols. Above all, ensure compliance from drivers. We cannot afford another hollow event. The hollow, a word used as a location or a designation. Kala leaned back in her chair, heart quickening. This wasn't folklore. It wasn't local superstition. It was policy. And someone had buried the paper trail beneath decades of silence. She revisited the notebooks. Clark's, Elor's, Rowan's, all referenced the road that bends. All described the same moment, the bus leaving its path, entering a place that looked the same but wasn't, and always, just before that shift, the driver would whistle. She replayed the old cassette again, the one found in the Arlington bus. At minute 3:42, just before the tape degraded into static, there it was, a soft, 4-note whistle, unmistakable. She isolated the sound, ran it through analysis software. The frequency spike matched a tone used in early ultrasonic signaling devices, commonly installed in 1970s transportation vehicles for proximity alerts. But this tone was too short to be a warning. It was a trigger, an activation, a cue. The driver would whistle. The road would change, and the children would vanish. In the morning, she would drive the corridor again, not to follow the road, but to find where it stopped, pretending to be one. At 7:02 a.m., Kala was already behind the wheel. Cruiser pointed west toward the curve where the 3 cases converged. She had no backup, no warrant. Just a GPS signal that blinked out every time she neared mile marker 17, and a gut-deep instinct that whatever waited out there didn't care about jurisdiction. The early fog clung low to the trees, folding across the pavement like fabric. No birds, no traffic. Only the rumble of her tires and the ticking sound of the dashboard clock, second by second, as if marking time on something ancient and long overdue. She passed the Danvers water tower, rusted and half-collapsed. It was the last known landmark before things went strange in every account, before the trees grew too dense, and the road bent in ways that made no sense on any map. At mile 17.3, she felt it. A pull, subtle, not physical. The road ahead seemed to shimmer slightly, not visually, not like heat, but conceptually, as if it were unsure of its own existence. She slowed. Her hand hovered over the recording app on her phone and tapped it on. At 17.6, the bend came. Sharp, too sharp for a county road. The asphalt narrowed, as if compressed by the weight of memory. Trees pushed closer, limbs crossing overhead, forming a tunnel that no sunlight touched. She recognized this from the notebooks. Clark's line. The sun stops showing up when the road starts lying. Rowan's. The tunnel eats the morning. The clock stops ticking. Her radio blinked out, not static silence. Then, somewhere just beyond the bend, a sound broke the stillness. 4 notes. A whistle. Clear, deliberate. She slammed the brakes. The cruiser rocked forward and stalled. She sat frozen, breath caught, eyes locked on the trees ahead. No movement. But the sense of being observed pressed against her chest like a hand. She opened the door, stepped out. The air was colder now, damp, and still. She turned on her body cam. Then she heard something else. Tires, gravel, a school bus, unseen, moving slowly somewhere beyond the pines. She ducked down, crouched behind her car. The sound passed, then silence. She waited. 1 minute, 2, nothing. She pushed into the trees, flashlight sweeping side to side. The forest here was wrong, symmetrical, unnaturally so. Branches curved in mirrored arcs. No undergrowth, just packed soil and moss. Then, 50 feet in, she saw it. A clearing. Not man-made, not natural. Geometrically perfect. In the center, a rusted post, maybe 5 feet high, with a black box bolted to the top, like an old fare collector or toll reader, covered in grime and moss, It looked forgotten, but not broken. Below it, embedded in the soil, a small metal plate with a 6-digit number, 42511. Again, she stared at it, breath quickening. Her phone vibrated. A message from a number she didn't know. One word. Transferred. The signal dropped. The flashlight flickered. And the whistle came again. But this time, it wasn't from the trees. It was behind her. Kala spun around, flashlight cutting through the mist in frantic arcs. Nothing. No footsteps. No breath. Just the whistle, 4 notes. Slow and deliberate, hanging in the air like fog, refusing to lift. Her hand went instinctively to her holster. She drew, not out of habit, but the primal understanding that something had breached the space behind her, not with footsteps, but with memory. The post remained motionless, but the forest had shifted, not visibly, spatially. The symmetry was gone. The branches no longer matched their opposites. Trees leaned at impossible angles. The air pressed differently, heavier, like the atmosphere had gained density without gaining substance. She stepped backward, keeping her flashlight forward, heart pounding loud enough to mute the wind. The metal plate 042511 gleamed faintly under the beam. She looked down. The soil at the base of the post had changed. Looser now, damp, recently disturbed. She knelt, free hand brushing back moss and leaves. Something jutted out, red plastic, bent and worn, the edge of a ruler. Next to it, a water-damaged index card, barely legible. She squinted. Quiet room. Level 3. Row 9. School terminology, but not for any real school. This was categorization. She looked again at the post. Not a fare box. A terminal. And that plate? A marker. Transfer station. For what? She didn't know yet, but the term kept surfacing, echoing from every trace she'd uncovered. Transfer. Not lost. Not kidnapped. Not missing. A bureaucratic word. Cold. Precise. Like inventory. She stood and backed away from the clearing, eyes never leaving the trees. No more whistles. But the quiet didn't return either. Something was awake now. She could feel it. The forest wasn't watching anymore. It was listening. Back at her cruiser, the power flickered on the moment her boots hit the gravel. The engine turned over on the first try, though the dash clock blinked 12, 0 in frantic repetition. She drove without speaking. Not to herself, not to the recorder. Whatever had heard her in there, it would remember. By the time she reached the station, the sun had risen fully, washing the streets of Danvers hollow in thin gold. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The town didn't know the ground beneath it was rotting with secrets. She entered the records room, pulled files at random, cross-referenced the names from the Danvers list, the Arlington tragedy, the Graybend incident in '82, and froze. One name appeared on all 3 lists, not a child. A signature. M. Elor, Transport Oversight Officer. Signed on emergency forms, witness sheets, declarations of loss. Always with the same note beneath it. Transfer confirmed. Containment incomplete. Calla stared at the paper as her hands began to shake. She had found the roads that disappeared. Now she had to find where they led. It was nearly 10 p.m. when Calla returned to the cabin, the folder containing Eller's signature still gripped tightly in her hand. The quiet of the room was no longer comforting. Every creak in the floorboards, every distant groan of timber made her flinch. The windows were shut, blinds drawn, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something outside was watching, and worse, that it wasn't outside at all. She laid the papers out across the table again. Names, times, maps, photographs, decades of bureaucratic fingerprints smeared across the lives of children no one ever expected to be found. She kept returning to that single phrase, transfer confirmed, containment incomplete. Containment. She pulled the evidence logs from the Arlington dig site again and re-examined the forensic notations. 17 skeletons, all intact, 1 seat empty, 1 missing. But buried in the coroner's notes was something she had missed before, a small, Addendum. Residual thermal anomaly detected in seat 14. No known biological cause. Notified lab recommend follow-up. Residual thermal anomaly. The seat had been warm after 20 years underground. She sat back, breathing shallow, and in that moment, she heard it again. The whistle, but not from the forest. From inside the cabin, 4 notes. Low, drawn out. She stood, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other, heart hammering so loudly it nearly masked the creak of floorboards behind her. She turned nothing. But the red notebook had moved. It now lay open on the table, spine broken, as if someone had just read it. A fresh line had appeared on the last page. Not written in pen, etched, pressed into the paper like it had been carved with a fingernail. You saw the station. Now find the others. Kala backed away slowly, pulse deafening in her ears. The air in the cabin felt thick, the kind of thickness that came before a storm or a scream. She slammed the notebook shut, gathered the files, and locked the cabin behind her as she left. She didn't sleep that night. She drove, aimless, through town, through the hollow, headlights slicing through mist and shadow. She replayed the cassette, listened to the static between the notes, slowed the speed. And beneath the whistle, buried just low enough to escape casual notice, was a voice. Not a child's, a man's, murmuring, counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, skip. 1, 2, 3, 4, skip. It repeated, always skipping 5. Always starting over. She matched the pattern against the list of children on each bus. One thing aligned. Seat 5 was always empty. In every record, in every seating chart. Vacant, unassigned, or reserved. For what? Or who? She remembered what Clark had written. He skips me when he counts. I think that's bad. Seat 5 wasn't forgotten. Seat 5 was for something else. Kala parked the cruiser on the edge of an old county trail, miles from the station. Headlights still on. She stared into the trees. Seat 5. Seat 14. Always one missing. Always one extra. She pulled out the list again. Counted. Danvers Hollow, 20 registered, 19 recovered. Arlington, 19 registered, 18 recovered. Graybend, 21 registered, 20 recovered. The difference was always 1. And that one wasn't missing. It was watching. The next morning arrived without sunrise. The sky remained slate gray, heavy with a colorless haze that muted everything in its reach. Kala sat parked outside the county archive building, waiting for the clerk to unlock the doors. She hadn't slept. Her thoughts churned in fragments, numbers, names, images of rusted buses and children's bones neatly arranged in rows like they were waiting for a lesson to begin. At 9:00 sharp, the lights flickered on, and she stepped inside, greeted only by the sound of buzzing fluorescent bulbs and the faint smell of paper decay. The archive was one of the few places in the county that still stored microfilm. She bypassed the digital records entirely and headed for the 3rd floor, where boxes marked Transportation Civic, Edu 1960s, 1980s waited like forgotten tombs. She pulled reel after reel, feeding them into the reader with shaking hands, watching the past scroll by in silence. For hours, she combed the dusty black and white records, bus schedules, routing maps, emergency drill protocols. Then she found it. A form titled Alternate Contingency Transit Hollow County Sector. Date: August 17, 1968. Supervising Officer M. Elor. Signature: Present. Note: in the event of breach or misdirection, initiate Transfer Protocol D3. Compliant subjects will re-enter rotation following observational delay. Non-compliant variables are to be withheld until corrected or absorbed. Absorbed? Kala blinked hard. The language wasn't just cold. It was alien, dehumanized. These were children. But to this agency, whoever had built this hidden network of routes, they were test subjects, units, variables. The next page revealed a map. It wasn't of the county. It wasn't of the state. It was a grid. 37 transfer points, each marked with a simple black dot, each with a corresponding number. Each dot placed within what she now realized were bus routes that didn't exist anymore but once had. Every dot linked by a single, unnamed road, forming a perfect ring. At the center, a symbol, a five-pointed shape, a wheel, or a seal. And at the top of the page, stamped in red ink, Observational Vessel Access Corridors, Level 5 only, Code E, Seat 5. Kala exhaled sharply. She printed every image, every map, every note, and tucked them into her satchel. On her way out, the clerk, a man in his 60s with clouded eyes, stopped her at the door. "You found the ring, didn't you?" She froze. He smiled, though there was nothing warm about it. "We don't map the ring anymore," he said. "But it's still there, always waiting for the next bell." "What bell?" Kala asked, voice dry. He tapped a small metal box on the wall behind him. It looked like an old school alarm bell, wired with a toggle. "It rings when the route opens," he said. "Only those listening can hear it." She left without another word. Back in her car, she laid the map across the passenger seat and traced the dots. Each one aligned with a recorded disappearance. Every bus that vanished had followed the pattern. And seat 5? It wasn't just a gap. It was the mechanism, the switch, the observer. She circled it with her pen. Whatever seat 5 was, whatever purpose it served, it was not empty. It was never empty. That night, the wind changed. Not just in direction, but in its sound. The trees didn't sway. They leaned, responding to some subterranean signal Kala couldn't hear but felt in the marrow of her bones. She returned to the clearing from days before the rusted post, the terminal, the metal plate marked 042511. The air was colder this time, not by temperature, but by weight. Even her breath didn't sound right in it. She brought with her the ring map from the archives, now laminated and marked with red ink in every place a disappearance had occurred. It wasn't random. It was a ritual, a pattern, rotating decade by decade. She'd highlighted the last 4 nodes to activate. If it continued on schedule, the next site was only 27 miles south of her current location, a town called Westlock. She'd never heard of it. She couldn't find it on Google Maps. But there it was in county records. Last census listed in 1979. Population 143. After that, nothing. But this clearing transfer station was older than any town, and in the middle of the forest, where no one had disturbed the soil in years, something had been dug up. She could see it now. Slight shifts in the moss, depressions too clean. Something had stood here recently, something that hadn't left footprints. She walked toward the terminal. It buzzed, faint, almost imperceptible. A low electrical hum, like an engine idling on the other side of a wall. Then a single click. The metal plate at its base shifted. Slowly, methodically, it receded an inch into the soil, revealing a narrow slot. She crouched, flashlight steady. Inside was a card. Plastic, white, no name, no code. Only a single symbol in the center. A circle with 5 lines inside. Each line pointed outward like a spoke. The wheel. The same image from the archive maps. Her heart beat hard against her ribs. She picked it up. The metal plate sealed shut behind her. The terminal stopped humming. She felt it immediately. Not fear, but a kind of gravity. A pull. The air around her was no longer passive. It observed. She drove straight to the station, woke Deputy Marcus Lane from his cot, and slammed the evidence folder on his desk. "I think this isn't a case of abduction," she said, voice hoarse. "It's a system, a transportation system." He blinked at her, uncomprehending. They weren't kidnapped. They were processed, routed, Every bus that disappeared was part of the ring, and every time seat 5 was left vacant, Marcus swallowed hard. For who? Carla didn't answer. She opened the red notebook again. Sarah Clark's last surviving entry. The indentation on the torn page had been enhanced. Forensics had missed it the first time, but the lab had managed to reconstruct some of it. She read aloud. He says it only works when the seat is open. One seat. For the observer. He said the bus doesn't go without it. Marcus shook his head slowly. Why a seat? Why a child? Carla stared at the card in her hand. Because the children see what we can't, she said. They feel the wrongness first. The way the road bends. The way the driver stops blinking. They see the observer when it enters. She reached into her bag and pulled out a new file, one she hadn't shared yet. A missing person report. Filed October 12th, 1989. Time, 3:45 p.m. Name unknown. Age, unknown. Description, child, quiet, sat alone. Reported by driver A.C. Dale. Not one of the rostered students. Carla whispered, almost to herself, Seat 5 wasn't empty. It was reserved. Reserved for the one who never belonged. The one who always watched. The one who made the road bend. The next morning brought rain, not a downpour, but a slow, steady drizzle that soaked the roads and made the forest glisten like something alive and breathing. Carla stood in front of the sheriff's bulletin board, pinning up copies of the map, the symbol, the seating charts. She worked alone. Marcus Lane had gone silent after her last visit, retreating into a kind of haunted stillness. She didn't blame him. You could only push a man so far before what he saw started unraveling the threads he'd clung to his whole life. She took a red string, classic cliché of investigators, and connected 3 dots. Danvers Hollow, Arlington, Graybend. The triangle formed was lopsided, but precise. Then the 4th dot, Westlock. The shape was complete now. A diamond. Every point marked a transfer event. Every point had a common element. A bus, a driver, a missing child, and a seat left open that had never been assigned. She picked up the plastic card again, the one with the wheel symbol, and flipped it over. Still blank, still silent. But when she held it to the light, something faint shimmered beneath the surface. Not ink. Not etched. More like a shadow trapped in the plastic itself. A code. 5L5E9B. She ran it through databases. Nothing. Not license plates. Not case files. Not personnel IDs. Then she tried old-school filing system logic. 5L. Row 5. Left. 5E. Seat 5, emergency. 9B. Bus 9. Block B. Classroom codes? Transfer tags? Or worse, specimens? She printed the code and added it to the board. Outside, thunder rumbled softly over the hollow. She took her car back out to the woods. Not the terminal. A new location. The Westlock grid point. There was no town. Not anymore. Just a clearing. Overgrown. Reclaimed by nature. The only thing left was the foundation of what may have once been a schoolhouse. Half a staircase. A rusted bell on the ground. Cracked down the center. She knelt near the steps. Brushed away wet leaves. Found a slab of concrete with names carved into it. Children's names. Some she recognized from the Graybend file. Others were unfamiliar. She counted. 22. She checked the file. Only 21 were reported missing. One extra. Always one extra. The observer. She looked up and saw it then, just at the edge of the trees. Not a figure, a shape. A silhouette that didn't move, even as the wind stirred every branch around it. Its head was tilted slightly, as if watching her from behind the veil of the forest. She stood slowly, the card clutched in her hand. The shape didn't flinch, didn't fade. It simply remained. Present, acknowledging. She took one step forward and the rain stopped. All at once, the birds went silent. And in that pause, deeper than silence, she heard something else. A school bell, faint, ringing through time, and a child's voice behind her. "Don't sit in seat 5. Kala turned. Nothing. Only the wet air, the cracked staircase, and a trail of small footprints leading into the woods where no child had walked in years. She followed the footprints without thinking, not out of instinct, not out of bravery, something deeper, like a gravity that had decided its pull wasn't optional anymore. The trail wound through brush slick with rain, dirt giving way beneath her boots, the trees parting just wide enough for a person her size to pass through. But the prints were smaller, child-sized, delicate, and too well-defined. There was no smudging, no signs of weight. They were impressions, not footsteps, like something had pressed down without walking. The trail ended in a place that shouldn't have existed. A perfectly circular glade, bare of trees, silent in that unnatural way where no sound dares enter. In the center stood a sign rusted, tilting slightly, the kind used at bus stops in the 1960s. Faded lettering still visible beneath the corrosion. Authorized routing only transfer point 12. Below that, a number etched with fresh scratches. 5L, 5E9B. The same code from the card. Kala approached slowly. The wind didn't blow here. Her own breath felt like it didn't want to disturb the space. She reached out and touched the pole. It was warm. And then came the sound. Faint, mechanical. A distant rumble. Not thunder, not wind. A motor. A bus engine. Somewhere in the trees behind her. She turned, and the world shifted slightly, not visually, but logically. The distance between trees now felt wrong. The glade behind her had receded. The sign was gone, and headlights blinked through the fog. An old school bus. No lights on, no license plate. Just sitting, engine idling, frame half-rusted but intact. Her flashlight flickered. She approached. As she drew closer, the sound of the engine faded not because it shut off, but because something else took its place. Children. Whispers. Not full words. Just the cadence of frightened breaths. Inside, through the dirt-smeared windows, she saw movement. Not people, shadows. As if the bus remembered being full. As if the air inside still held the shapes of those who had once filled the seats. She stepped onto the first stair. The door opened for her, slowly, hydraulics hissing. The air inside was warm, dry, unnaturally still. Every seat was filled. With coats, shoes, backpacks, names stitched on straps. All weathered with time, except seat 5. It was empty, perfectly clean. Not a speck of dust. No wear, as though it had been waiting. She stepped toward it slowly, every fiber of her body screaming that this was wrong, that this seat didn't belong to a child. It was a throne in a room pretending to be a bus. On the wall beside it, etched in the yellow paint beneath the window, was a single phrase. "We ride until you remember." She backed away. Her foot struck something under the seat behind her. She crouched. A recorder. Old. Analog. She pressed play. Static. Then a child's voice. Barely audible. "I stayed awake when they said sleep." He changed. Not Mr. Dale anymore. Not a person anymore. He saw me watching. I didn't blink. I didn't move. He said I could sit in seat 5 if I stayed quiet, if I wanted to see where they go. The tape ended with a sharp click. Kala stepped back into the aisle. The bus was dark again. The door had closed. But she wasn't locked in. Not yet. She pressed the emergency release, and it hissed open. The forest outside looked the same but different in small ways. Less color. Less shape. As if she had passed through a filter. She climbed down. Turned back. The bus was gone. No engine. No shadow. No tracks. Just empty air and a rusted bus sign. Still warm. She didn't drive back to town. She couldn't. Something had shifted, not just in her perception, but in the way the world reacted to her. The air felt thinner. The sky stayed dim, like a filter had been placed between her and the sun. And the forest, once full of benign stillness, now throbbed with something worse than menace awareness. Calla stood motionless for nearly 10 minutes, where the bus had been, not trusting her legs, not trusting her sense of time. Her phone showed 11:14 p.m., the same time it had displayed before she left the archives the night before. It hadn't been updated. No signal, no clock function. Just the glowing numbers, frozen in place. She finally turned her body toward the direction she'd come from, though the trail was no longer visible. The earth behind her bore no footprints, no tire marks, no sign of passage. The woods had sealed themselves shut. She walked in silence, no longer trying to orient herself, but instead following a rhythm in her chest she couldn't explain, like an internal compass had been subtly rewired. Each step felt predetermined, as though she were returning to somewhere she'd already been, but couldn't remember. Eventually, she saw a break in the trees. It was a building, or what remained of one. Brick foundation, sunken roof, long rusted scaffolding strangled in vines. At the front, an oxidized metal plaque bent backwards by time. She approached, clearing the moss from the surface. Center for Exceptional Routing Division 9, District 5. No record of such a facility existed in any archive. Beneath that, someone had scratched new words in the metal with a sharp object. Observe and record. Forget and repeat. She moved inside. The interior was long abandoned, but not untouched. It didn't smell of dust. It smelled of formaldehyde, of bleach, of school supplies left in a sealed room for too long. Chairs were stacked against the wall in uniform rows. Desks bolted to the floor, facing a blank chalkboard. A teacher's desk in the corner. And something else, a projector, pointed toward the wall, power cord still intact, like it had just been unplugged the day before. She crouched beside it and found a box. Inside, dozens of reels. Each one labeled not with titles, but codes. 5L, 5E9B, TWIC 37A, 8P-SUCCD. She pulled one out at random, held it to the light. The film was blank, until she tilted it just slightly. Images appeared in flickering patches. Children sitting perfectly still, all facing forward, eyes wide, some open, some not. None of them were smiling. On the back of the reel, a single phrase. Transfer complete cycle, 5. She looked around. This wasn't a classroom. It was a holding station, a processing site. They were studied, watched, and then routed somewhere else. She stood, blood pounding in her ears. And from deeper inside the facility, a door creaked open. She didn't run. She couldn't. Her legs moved forward of their own accord, down a narrow hall lit by skylight and broken glass. At the end, a door, painted red, with a brass plate. Seat 5, entry access only. She reached for the knob. It turned. Inside, the room was dark. The light from the hallway barely pierced the edge. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw it. A single chair, child-sized, bolted to the center of the floor. Around it, 6 desks. Empty. No names. No chalk. Just absence. And on the wall behind the chair, in tall black letters, "Observer remains until replaced." She stepped backward slowly. But the floor clicked under her weight. A pressure plate. The lights flickered on. And a voice came through an unseen speaker. Male. Flat. Recorded. Transfer protocol initiated. Observer en route. Then silence. She ran. The corridor behind her seemed longer than before, too long. Her boots struck concrete with a hollow echo as she ran, breath sharp, pulse louder than the wind. The projector room was gone. Or moved. The path no longer matched what she'd entered. The building was rearranging itself. Or she had crossed another threshold, one she hadn't seen, but that had recognized her. Every light above flickered in rhythm with her pace, timed like a countdown. She reached a steel door at the end of the hallway and shoved it open into blinding daylight. It wasn't morning. It wasn't any time she recognized. The sky was pale gray, washed out, and yet the sun sat directly overhead. The shadows were wrong, inverted. The trees on the edge of the field bent toward her, not away. Their trunks curved unnaturally, like listening devices. She stopped. The field stretched before her, cleared, flat, artificial. And at its center, a school bus. But not rusted, not buried. Pristine. Yellow paint, unblemished. All the windows intact. The same number stenciled in white near the driver's side fender. 47. She stepped forward. The bus door opened with a hiss. Inside, the seats were empty. But every window had a name etched in the glass. All children, all from different towns. Danvers Hollow, Arlington, Graybend, Westlock. Names she had read. Faces she had seen on photocopied missing person reports. And again, seat 5, empty, unetched. Instead, carved into the vinyl seatback in sharp, erratic lines. Not a seat, a window. She took her phone from her pocket. It was working again. Battery full, signal strong. The time read 11:14 p.m. Still, always 11:14. She opened her recorder and spoke into it. This is Detective Calamoran. Subject, transfer network case. I have confirmed the existence of at least 4 routing points, possibly more. These are not abductions. They're organized cycles. A transportation system for somethinker, someone monitoring, recording, repeating. The children aren't taken. They're selected, routed, observed. And one is always left. One is always changed. Seat 5 is not for them. It's for something else. She paused, then looked up. The bus's mirrors reflected her face, but not her expression. Her reflection sat still, head tilted, watching. It blinked, but she hadn't. It smiled, but she hadn't. It mouthed a word she couldn't hear, then vanished. The bus engine coughed. Started. She stumbled back, heart in her throat, weapon raised though she knew it was useless. The headlights flicked on, the door closed, and the bus drove forward, into the forest. But there was no road. It drove into the space between trees, where wheels shouldn't roll and engines shouldn't start. Until it faded, and the clearing was empty. She stood there for a long time, alone, until her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. One word. Next. She looked down at her chest. A faint red outline had begun to appear across her shirt. A 5-spoke circle, burning cold through the fabric. Her voice, barely audible now, cracked as she spoke into the recorder again. I think I'm the replacement. She drove until the road gave up, where asphalt surrendered to dirt and the GPS stopped pretending to help. Each mile away from the clearing didn't feel like escape. It felt like descent. Like going deeper into something not built on maps. Her mind clawed at the thought that maybe, just maybe, she could go back to what she was before the field, before the red room, before the reflection that had blinked without her. But the symbol was still there, faint but undeniable. Burned through her shirt, pressed like a watermark on her skin, 5 spokes in a circle, as if some machine had tagged her, logged her presence. She didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? She called Marcus Lane, the deputy. No answer. She called again. Straight to voicemail. She turned the cruiser around and headed toward the station, the rain now falling in needle-thin lines. As she pulled into the lot, her headlights passed over something that hadn't been there before. A bus. Not a functioning one. Rusted. Abandoned. She parked. The bus was empty, save for one thing. A notebook, identical to the one Sarah Clark had written in decades ago. This one had her name on it, Kala Morin. She picked it up slowly, hands trembling. The first page was blank. The second read, "You arrived on time. You sat in the right seat. Now they know where you are." She dropped it. It landed with a hollow thud against the metal floor. Somewhere far off, a bell rang. But it wasn't a school bell. It was deeper, more final. Inside the sheriff's station, the lights were on, but no one was there. Desks abandoned mid-task. Coffee still steaming. Papers fluttering in a breeze from no open windows. And every screen, every monitor, every terminal displayed the same thing. A live video feed of her standing in the bus, staring down at the notebook. Being watched, she backed away from the monitors. One by one, they clicked off. Dark, until only one remained. On it, a still image, black and white, low resolution. It showed her sitting in a bus seat, head turned toward the window. Seat 5, captioned with the date, October 12, 1989, the day bus 47 vanished. She stepped closer. The timestamp on the bottom read, 11:14 p.m. She looked at her phone, still frozen on the same time. She whispered to herself, breath shaky, "I wasn't on that bus." But the screen disagreed. The reflection in the monitor smiled again. The same as before. A mouth that moved before hers. It whispered something she could almost understand. Then came the sound again. A whistle. 4 notes. Not from a speaker. From behind her. She turned. Nothing. No one. But on the wall above the exit, freshly painted in black, every observer forgets until they remember. Her phone buzzed once more. New message. 5 words. Transfer confirmed. Containment still incomplete. And beneath it, route 5L, 5E, 9B. She dropped the phone. The hallway ahead of her darkened. Lights clicking off one by one. She knew where it led. Back to the red door. Back to the seat. Back to the window pretending to be a seat. She whispered into the silence, "I didn't choose this." And the wind answered, in a child's voice not her own, "You did, the moment you watched." The silence in the hallway wasn't passive. It leaned forward, expectant. As the last overhead light dimmed, Kala stood frozen, phone at her feet, the screen still glowing with that final message, route 5L, 5E, 9B. It wasn't a number anymore. It wasn't a file. It was a destination, and she had already arrived. She picked up the notebook, her name still scrawled across the cover in a handwriting that wasn't hers, but that somehow knew her all the same. The pages inside were no longer blank. The first dozen entries were transcripts. Moments. Memories. Her memories, but not ones she had lived. March 12, 1984. I saw the door open and I didn't tell anyone. August 7th, 1989. I watched him change in the mirror. His face moved wrong. October 12, 1989. I sat in seat 5. She turned the pages faster, heartbeat pounding in her throat. The writing got sloppier, more desperate. They don't want escape, they want replacement. When you remember, you return. You're not a passenger, you're the route. The last page was torn. The impression left behind was unmistakable. A sketch. A bus. On fire. But the fire was inside it. Contained. The bus frame intact, untouched. Flames pressed against the windows from within like hands. Beneath it, in thin, shaking script, I'm still here. The hallway groaned. Not the building, the hallway. As if the structure itself was folding inward, narrowing. She turned to leave. The door she'd come through was gone. Only the red door remained, faintly glowing from within. She walked forward. No steps echoed. No air stirred. Each pace took longer than it should have, like the floor was stretching under her boots. She reached the red door. The brass handle was warm. A plaque had been added. Not engraved, written in permanent marker. Re-entry granted. Observer, more N, 5L. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was the chair. The same one. Child-sized. Seat 5. But this time, someone was sitting in it. A child. Not quite visible. More like a shadow sculpted into human shape. Their head tilted, watching. Their face nearly hers. But wrong. Eyes slightly too large. Movements just a beat behind. Mimicry without comprehension. It spoke. Her voice echoed and slowed. I waited. You remembered. She stepped backward. But the floor did not allow it. Instead, it pushed her forward gently, firmly. The figure in the chair stood. And for the first time, she saw its back. It wore her badge, her jacket, her hair. It had been wearing her life like a coat. As it turned to leave, it smiled without joy, without hostility. Only relief. You watch now, it said. I'll ride. The door shut behind it without sound. She stood alone in the room. The chair sat empty now, but no longer waiting. Accepting. She felt it behind her. A weight. A command. She sat. The chair molded to her body, metal cold but familiar. The walls around her began to flicker. Images projected across every surface. Children. Fields. Buses. Classrooms that weren't real. Windows looking into tunnels. Tunnels made of memories. Memories made of roots. She opened her mouth to speak. But the room whispered first. Observer seated. Cycle begins. And in the distance, impossibly far, impossibly close, a whistle sounded. 4 notes. And then motion. Motion, not as the body feels it, but as memory does, slipping, bending, detaching from linear time. She wasn't moving through space anymore. She was moving through routes. Through remembered journeys that weren't hers, stitched together like film reels spliced at the wrong angles. Kala sat still in the chair, but she felt the illusion of windows rushing past her. Not glimpses. A hallway flickering into view, full of lockers painted the wrong color. A child's room with 2 shadows, but only one occupant. A road that bent left but ended up right. In each flicker, the same pattern. Something slightly off. Something watching. Always from the 5th window. Always where no one else ever looked. The room whispered again, not with words, but with understanding. She didn't hear, it told. You are Observer 47C. Route active. Transfer in progress. A screen descended from the ceiling, silently. Projected on it was footage. Grainy, black and white. A child standing at a bus stop alone, shivering slightly, clutching a lunchbox. Time code, October 12, 1989, 6:50, 1 a.m. Location, Danvers Hollow. It was Sarah Clark. Kala stared, breath tight. The girl stepped onto the bus, looked briefly at seat 5, then passed it by. Another child followed, and another, and then frame skip. Static. A shadow passed across the lens. The driver didn't look up, didn't blink, just whistled. 4 notes. Kala stood, but her legs remained still. Her intention to stand echoed in the chamber, but her body stayed seated. The screen changed. Footage now in color. Modern. A school parking lot. Different town. Different year. A child stepping onto bus 82. Empty seats everywhere. Except seat 5. Still unoccupied. The child hesitated, looked directly at the camera at her. Kala flinched. The child waved. Not at the camera. At her, then sat in seat 6. The route began. Data streamed in on another screen now, incomprehensible strings of numbers and phrases. Rotation 12, B. Transfer in progress, 119. Observer recording status. Live. She tried to close her eyes, couldn't. The chair didn't allow forgetting. It required attention, required memory. She understood now. This wasn't punishment. This was function. The observer wasn't a prisoner, it was a witness. And the witnessing was the key. Because the route didn't complete without it. Something needed to see. Something needed to log. To report. To remember. Every cycle begins with a witness. Every transfer requires confirmation. The words weren't spoken. They were written on the walls, in shadows, in her thoughts, and worse, they had always been there, beneath her real memories, as if the observer hadn't just been watching the children, but watching her. Kala reached toward the console in front of her. Dozens of switches, buttons, levers, but all locked, except one, a single red button, labeled Reclaim Route. Her hand hovered. Trembling, the screens flashed again. Children across decades, eyes wide, always looking back, never at the driver, always at seat 5, always at her. They remembered her. She had always been there. Even before she sat down, she pressed the button, and the world blinked. The world didn't explode or collapse or scream. It inverted. The blink was silent but all-consuming, like someone had turned a page in a book she hadn't realized she was inside. One moment, she was seated in the observer's chair, surrounded by light and memory, and always watching. The next, darkness. Absolute. Not absence of light, but absence of reference. There was no ground, no sound, no air, only the distinct sensation of being watched from within herself. She tried to move, but there was no movement. She tried to breathe, but she no longer had lungs. Not here, not now. The observer wasn't a person. It was a position, and pressing that button hadn't freed her from it. It had opened a corridor. She began to hear them, not voices, echoes, layers of recollection. We counted 18 recovered. Seat 5's never assigned. He was whistling when the road bent. Not a passenger, an instrument. The flood was impossible to stop. Every file she'd read, every page of the notebook, every whispered child's voice over an old cassette. Now all at once. All through her. But then a crack. A tiny one. Light seeped through. Not blinding, not welcome, but real. And with it, form. She was seated again, a chair beneath her, a chamber around her. But not the same one. It was older, stone walls, not metal, scratched floors, dust dancing in stale shafts of light that filtered through slats above. And in front of her children, not watching her, not afraid, sitting, waiting, all of them in chairs, neat rows, 20 seats, 19 filled, seat 5 empty. In their hands, notebooks. On their faces, stillness. As if this was a classroom and she was the teacher. Or the lesson. She stood slowly, body returned, the press of gravity like an old coat thrown over her shoulders. The children turned in unison, eyes fixed on her, but not through her. At her, one raised their hand. A girl, freckles, no more than 9. She spoke in a voice Kala had heard once before on tape, beneath layers of static. "You're back." Kala's mouth moved. Words shaped themselves. "What is this?" The girl pointed behind her. Kala turned. A wall covered in clocks. All stuck. Same time. 11:14 p.m. Dozens of clocks. Dozens of cycles. The girl said, "This is the hub, the last stop. The stop before we forget again." Kala stepped toward her. "But I remembered," she said. "I broke the cycle." The child shook her head. You pressed reclaim. That means you want to see, to witness. That means it's not done. The walls around them rippled slightly. A low hum began, rising from the floor. The kind of sound heard in airplane cabins when altitude changes but no one tells you. The children didn't react, but the clocks did. One ticked forward. A single second. 11:15 p.m. The hum stopped. All the children looked at her now, eyes wide. Someone's sitting in seat 5, the girl whispered. And the door behind Kala opened. She turned. Light bled in from somewhere else. And from that light, a figure stepped forward. Not a child. Not a driver. Not someone familiar. A reflection of herself. But not from now. From before. Before she joined the case. Before she remembered the road. Before she took the seat. And it smiled. You watched once, it said. Now I write again. The reflection sat in the empty chair. Seat 5. And the room dissolved like smoke. Smoke gave way to silence. Not peaceful, not void-held silence. Like the breath of the world was waiting to exhale, but hadn't yet decided if it should. Kala was standing again, somewhere between structure and forest, floor and ground. The lines were indistinct. Stone gave way to leaves. Walls bled into trees. She was in between now. Not fully returned. Not fully removed. And around her, the air pulsed not like sound, but like memory trying to take shape. Seat 5 was filled. Her reflection, that version of her, was back in motion. Which meant she was not. The observer remained. She tried to move, but her body was resistant, reluctant. Every step forward felt like walking through fog that wasn't made of moisture but of time. She reached a clearing. Another one. Perfect circle. Centerpiece. A bus. Not whole. Its shell melted like wax, collapsed inward, half swallowed by earth. But still humming. Still alive. Still watching. She stepped closer. The bus door groaned and swung open, but only halfway. Enough for her to see inside, but not enough to enter. Every seat was filled. Not with people. With projections. Frozen images. Echoes of children. Shadows in postures of fear, hope, and resignation. Each one stared forward. Eyes glassy. Mouths slightly open. Kala walked the length of the bus's outer edge, stopping at seat 5. She looked through the window. It was empty again. Clean. Waiting. And for the first time, she saw what sat behind seat 5. A panel. A hatch. One she'd never noticed before, hidden in the wall of the bus, almost folded into its architecture. Etched into the metal, a spiral of numbers. Not a code. A countdown. 17, 16, 15. It ticked as she watched. No sound. Just change. She pressed her hand to the glass of seat 5. The countdown stopped. The hatch clicked open. Inside, something small. A speaker. A reel. A button. And a tag. Plastic, just like the one she found before. This one said, "Reassignment approved. More N, 5L now inactive." Her throat tightened. The route had been rerouted. Someone had sat in the seat. Not her, but someone else. The cycle hadn't been broken. It had been traded. And she, the one who remembered, the one who pressed the button, was now outside it. Not the passenger. Not the observer. Something else entirely. She heard movement behind her. Turned. A child stood at the edge of the clearing. Not afraid. Wearing a yellow jacket. Holding a red notebook. She recognized the eyes. Sarah Clark. No older. No different. The same girl from 1989. Exactly the same. She didn't speak. She walked forward slowly and handed Kala the notebook. The cover was torn, pages wet. But one entry was bold and fresh. Written in a hand, not childlike anymore. We all sat once, but only one remembers. If you're reading this, you're the window now. Kala dropped the book. The trees whispered. The bus lights flickered on. The hatch sealed shut again. The countdown reset. 19, 18. Sarah, if it was her, smiled faintly. She reached into her coat and pulled out something familiar. Another card. The same symbol. The wheel. She slipped it into Kala's hand, then stepped back. Into the mist. Gone. And Kala looked down at the card. Her name was gone. In its place. Next, Kala stood alone again, the card cooling in her palm like a coin dredged from the bottom of a lake. It no longer bore her name, just that single word, next, printed in bold black letters sharp enough to slice. She didn't move for a long time. The bus behind her made no sound, but it hummed in her chest like a memory about to bloom. The spiral countdown restarted ticking down slowly now, deliberately, as though waiting for her to understand. 19:18. She closed her fist around the card. It didn't resist. It sank slightly into her skin, edges gone soft, not metal or plastic anymore, but thought, instruction. And as it did, she felt something unlock inside her. Not knowledge, not clarity, permission. The trees bent slightly toward her, like an audience shifting in their seats before a show begins. Wind passed through them like breath, pushing leaves in a slow spiral overhead. The forest no longer watched her. It responded to her. She stepped forward. The earth did not crunch beneath her boots. It parted. Her foot met soil like it had always known her weight. At the edge of the clearing, another child waited. Not Sarah. This one is younger, a boy. Eyes distant, clothes outdated, 1970s denim, sleeves too short, shoes untied. He looked up at her, said nothing, held out a piece of paper. She took it. No words, just an outline. A circle, 5 lines radiating out like spokes. And inside it names, one by one, written in loops around the rim. All crossed out, except one. Hers. At the top. She folded the paper, tucked it into her coat, and kept walking. The trees opened to a new path, one she hadn't seen before, one not marked on any grid or map. Not even the wheel had charted this one. She realized it now. The observer wasn't seated anymore. Because there was no longer just a cycle. There was expansion. The network was evolving, from recovery to relay. And she wasn't just a witness. She was a carrier. She reached another clearing, smaller, intimate. A bench sat beneath a dead oak. A school bag leaned against it. Open, empty. Inside it, a folder, labeled Intake Route 0A. Inside the folder, Polaroids. Children, sleeping, eyes closed. Not frightened, not hurt, just waiting. Their names listed beside them, age, location, transfer date. Kala flipped to the final page. No photo, only a time, 11:14 p.m. And a line beneath it, route available, waiting for observer. A familiar wind passed again, whispering between branches like a message being spread too fast to catch. But she heard one word, soft, almost regretful. Soon. The card in her hand flared warm once more. Its face now blank again. No next. Just a blinking cursor etched in faint light. Waiting to be filled, waiting to be named. She understood what it was now. It wasn't a pass. It was a form, an application. And the forest had already accepted hers. The cursor blinked in silence, suspended above the card like a soft heartbeat, waiting, not demanding but inevitable. Its rhythm was slow, methodical, like the turning of a great wheel hidden beneath the world's surface. A single name was expected. A designation. Not hers. Not anymore. Kala stood in the clearing, the folder still in her hands, pages light and dry despite the air's weight. The names of the children blurred in her vision not because they were fading, but because they were shifting, as if the folder wasn't archival, but predictive. Her fingers found the last page again. The name slot remained blank. Observer. Time. 11:14 p.m. Location. Active node. Unknown. Route. Pending transfer. And beneath it, a signature line. Not to be signed by the observer, but by something else. Approval. M. Elor, Oversight Officer. The signature was fresh. The ink had bled. He had signed it. Recently, which meant he wasn't gone. He had never been gone. He had simply shifted lanes. Still supervising. Still watching. Still assigning. A rustle broke the silence behind her. She turned. The boy was back. Denim jacket. Dirt-smudged face. But something had changed in his eyes. He wasn't just a child. He was a carrier, too. The same imprint pulsed faintly under the collar of his shirt, 5 spokes, barely visible in the dim. He held something new in his hand. A mirror, framed in copper, aged and weathered. He held it out to her. She took it slowly. The glass was cloudy. At first. Then it cleared. Her face stared back. Only older. Not aged by time, but worn by knowledge, fractured by layers of memory no one should have to carry. And behind her reflection, through the glass, she saw the bus again. Seat 5. Occupied. This time, not by a child, but by a man. In a sheriff's uniform. Eyes closed. Breathing shallow. Marcus Lane. She gasped. The reflection blinked. The image changed. Now a classroom. The same desk arrangement. The same chalkboard. Empty. Except for the phrase written in jagged white, "The seat remembers who watched." She looked away from the mirror. The boy was gone. Only the imprint of footsteps remained in the grass. The mirror, now warm in her hands, flickered again. Text scrolled slowly across its surface. Observer assignment complete. Transfer node. Realigned. New route begins. 5L, 5E-0A. Then silence. She pocketed the mirror, its weight unnatural, like it held gravity of its own. In the center of the clearing now stood a pole. It hadn't been there before. A rusted school crossing sign, twisted and unreadable. Tied to it, a bell. A real one. Old, tarnished, fissured down one side. It rang. Once. And in that instant, the shadows all around the tree line leaned inward. Like they bowed, the forest acknowledged her. Not as a guest, not as a trespasser, but as a part of it. A signal flared in the sky, brief, crimson, gone in a blink. A mark, a location, a new stop. She knew where it was. She'd seen the shape before, not on maps, but in dreams. A small coastal town with a long-defunct bus route. But the road still there, waiting. She began to walk. The path cleared for her, as if rehearsed. And behind her, the bell rang again. Twice. The sound of the second bell echoed deeper than the first, not in volume, but in reach. It folded into her bones, like something knocking from the inside out. As if a part of her, dormant until now, had finally been located and claimed. A second confirmation. A second cycle. The first bell names you. The second sets you in motion. The forest dimmed, not with the coming of night, but with the withdrawal of attention. The eyes were closing. The watchers satisfied. For now, Kala walked with purpose, though each step took her further from certainty. The path ahead didn't follow geography. It followed association, memory. She wasn't moving toward a place. She was returning to a moment that hadn't happened yet. The route appeared. Not paved, not named, just a strip of dirt with worn wheel grooves that shimmered like heat waves on cold earth. She knew this path. She'd seen it in photographs. A wide shot of a coastal ridge, taken from the air during a survey decades ago. One road, one bus, one disappearance. The sign at the fork was barely legible, but she knew the letters by heart. Merrill Point, the town that hadn't existed for 30 years. She followed the road. Around the bend, a structure rose from the fog. A bus stop. Modern. Too modern. Newer than the forest. Newer than her memories. Out of place in every way. Glass walls, stainless steel beams, digital display screen on the roof. She stepped inside. The display flickered, then stabilized. Route 0A. Next arrival, 11:14 p.m. Observer logged. More N. Reactivated. A bench waited. Metal. Cold. Beside it, a laminated clipboard hung on the wall. A schedule. Not of times, of names. Each with a corresponding town. Each with a number next to it. All crossed out. Except the last. Calamorin, seat 5. Initiate. She sat. The fog rolled in, like breath held too long. A mechanical rumble sounded in the distance. No lights. No road beneath it. But the bus was coming. She felt it before she saw it. The ground trembled slightly with each approach. She gripped the mirror in her coat. Its surface pulsed faintly, showing nothing but darkness. Until it blinked and showed a face. A boy. New. Unfamiliar. Alone. Waiting. Another town. Another route. Another cycle beginning. The display above her changed. Now arriving. The bus emerged through the mist, not from the horizon, but from a fold in the air, like it had been pulled from behind a curtain, only it could pass through. It stopped in front of her. The doors opened. She didn't move. Didn't need to. The driver stepped out. Gray coat. Black hat. Face shadowed. In place of eyes mirrors. She saw herself in both. He extended a hand not to take hers, but to offer the card back. It was blank again. Only one word pulsed on its surface. Rewrite. The final option. The one you're not supposed to choose. The one that doesn't end the cycle, but sends it somewhere new. She took the card. The driver nodded once, turned, and stepped back onto the bus. She followed. Inside, it was empty. Completely. Even seat 5. But not for long. She took her place. The door hissed closed. The bell inside rang once. 3 times total. A final cycle. The windows turned black. The road disappeared. But the bus moved. And somewhere far away, a child began to forget. Because the observer had returned. And now, the route could begin again. The bus did not follow the roads. It followed remembering. Each turn wasn't into streets but into thoughts, places in the mind that had long since decayed into emotion and instinct. The windows didn't show landscapes. They showed possibilities. Flashing scenes that never happened but could have, should have. A child's face watching the world bend. A parent looking at an empty bed. A driver who forgot his name before his last stop. Kala sat motionless in seat 5, but her senses unraveled outward. The chair vibrated gently beneath her, pulsing not in mechanical rhythm, but in sync with her pulse, or the world's. She couldn't tell anymore. Then voices, not heard, received. The same way static carries intent before it carries words. They came in fragments. Seat 5 is the hinge. It doesn't turn unless someone sees. Every transfer remembers the last. She tried to focus, to ground herself, but she was already in the in-between, the space of passage, the domain of the bus, and ahead a shape, a new town, It formed as if conjured from the fog, as if memory alone built the buildings. No sign of modern life, no movement. Marrow Point, rebuilt, reconstructed through memory's lens, accurate only in sensation, not detail. A stoplight blinked above a silent street. A sign over a grocery store swayed in the wind that didn't move the trees. The bus slowed. Doors opened. No one boarded, but Calla saw them. Children, lining the sidewalks. Each one translucent, flickering. Some held notebooks. Others clutched stuffed animals. All of them stared at her. Not with fear, with recognition. She understood. They weren't waiting for her to speak. They were watching how she watched. One girl stepped forward. The bus doors still open. She pointed to Calla, then drew a shape in the air with her finger. A circle. 5 lines. Then she vanished. The driver never moved, never looked back. But the voice, her voice, spoke through the cabin. "You're seeing too much." And then the bus sped forward. The town behind them folded in on itself. A paper model caught in a gust. Gone. Calla's fingers dug into the seat. Her reflection in the window smiled, but it wasn't her anymore. It blinked first, and mouthed, "Don't forget again." Suddenly, the mirror in her coat vibrated violently. She pulled it free. Its surface flashed red. Rewrite in progress. Confirm observer anchor. Y? N? Her breath hitched. She'd made the transfer possible, but now it asked her to anchor it. To stay? To stabilize what came next. One confirmation, and she would never leave the seat again. The door would vanish. The roads would close. And she would watch. Forever. But if she didn't, the mirror flashed again. New image. A child. Crying. Alone on a bench. Tag around his neck. One word written in crayon. Observer. They'd assigned someone else. Another innocent. Calla looked down at the card. Still blank. Still blinking. She reached for the mirror, pressed her thumb to the confirmation light, and whispered, "Anchor confirmed." The cabin lights dimmed. The windows went black. A new road appeared. Not one that led back, but one that had never been taken. Until now. The road ahead shimmered with unreality, less a street than a concept, paved not with tar but with moments. Glimpses of lives intersected beneath the wheels. A girl crying beneath a school bleacher. A boy gripping the last note his sister ever wrote. A mother standing at a bus stop long after sunset, repeating her child's name like a mantra that time would eventually answer. Calla felt the seat grow colder beneath her, not with temperature, but with finality. The anchor was set. Her choice had cemented the route. There was no way back now, not through memory, not through pleading. She had taken the role, fully, completely. Seat 5 was no longer a place. It was a state of being. The windows around her flickered again, this time not with children but with observers. Dozens. Hundreds. Each seated in a different variation of Seat 5. Each staring out, mouth unmoving, eyes wide. Some were her. Some were others. All linked by the same contract, to witness, to record, to make the road real. Then came the quiet. Total. Weightless. Not like silence, but like something had stopped breathing. Even the bus, which had vibrated with a low hum until now, fell still. In the reflection of the darkened glass beside her, something began to emerge. Letters, glowing softly. A message. Anchor accepted. Transfer rewritten. Route established. 5L0A. Revised. Prepare for passengers. She turned to look toward the front of the bus. No one was there. Not the driver. Not the console. Just a long, empty aisle of seats until one by one they began to shift. Shadows appeared. Not full figures. Just the implication of presence. And then one child stepped onto the bus. Real, tangible, breathing, eyes wide with confusion. He looked no older than 7. Wiry frame, red sneakers, a Star Wars patch sewn onto his backpack. Kala watched him pause at the top step. He looked left, right, seat by seat. Then his eyes locked on hers. He pointed to seat 5, then shook his head. She nodded. "No," she whispered. "It's taken." He sat in the second row instead, gaze still pinned to her. And that was when Kala realized he was watching how she watched, too. The way the other children had. He was learning from her, from the anchor. And it mattered, because the bus lurched, not forward, not backward, but inward, like folding into a version of itself no one had ever ridden before. The other seats filled with possibility. Passengers who had not been passengers until now. And Kala, the only constant, stared forward. The card in her pocket flashed once more. Now permanently marked. Seat 5 assigned. Observer fixed. And under that, a phrase she had not seen before. A promise. A warning. A law. Once you see, you cannot return unseen. Then a new voice. One she hadn't heard before. Not the driver. Not a child. Not hers. A voice that came from beneath the frame of the bus itself. The road speaking back. First stop. Next witness. Cycle 1 begins. And the doors opened. The doors didn't open outward with a mechanical hiss or the squeal of hydraulics. They opened inward, folding space like paper peeled back from a memory. The air that poured in wasn't wind, it was feeling. The breath of a town caught mid-sentence. Time paused at the cusp of remembering. And on the other side of the threshold, a street that shouldn't exist anymore came into view. Kala recognized it not because she had ever been there, but because every observer did. The architecture was dream-smooth, the symmetry too perfect, the colors slightly muted, like a memory reconstructed too many times. The child in seat 2 stood, looked at her, waiting. Kala understood. It had begun. She nodded. He stepped down from the bus, into the town. The moment he crossed the invisible boundary between floor and earth, the entire scene shifted not visually, but emotionally. The town changed to fit him. Houses rearranged. Fences moved. Signs rewrote themselves in crayon handwriting. The street signs bore his name. Storefronts reflected his fears. The sky was the exact color of his worst day. This wasn't just a town. It was a projection, a test. The bus didn't close its doors, because the route was not a closed loop anymore. It was open-ended. Kala sat silently, hands folded in her lap. The pulse of her chair now synced to the rhythm of the town's beating heart. From her vantage, she watched. The boy walked past a house with yellow curtains, and he flinched. Kala whispered into the air, "Curtains, trigger." The window beside her recorded the note. Not on paper, not in sound. In reality, the system, whatever it was, absorbed her noticing. Another house, a swing creaking in the wind. The boy looked twice, then smiled faintly. "Familiarity. Safe node," she said. The route adjusted. The swing now replicated on multiple porches. She was witnessing. And with her witnessing, the path of the boy's route shaped itself. He was choosing, yes, but only within the options her attention allowed. And then something new. A mirror appeared. Not handheld. Standing. Tall. Fixed in the center of a cul-de-sac like a monument. The boy stopped before it. The reflection showed his face. Then Kala's. Then neither. Then a shadow. It stepped out. No sound. No resistance. Just became a duplicate of the boy. Same eyes. Same shoes. Different intent. He didn't flinch. Didn't scream. Instead, He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded page, walked toward the shadow, handed it over. The shadow took it, nodded, then walked away, disappeared into the nearest alley. The boy turned, returned to the bus, sat in seat 6. Kala's voice was dry, quiet. "What was that?" The bus answered, a voice like cold air through glass. "Offload complete. Transfer divergent stored. Passenger returned." On the glass beside her, a new phrase etched itself in slow silver letters. "Shadow compliance. 1." The observer confirmed it was stable. Kala blinked. Her breath fogged the glass. Outside, the town folded again. Buildings melting into light. Becoming a suggestion. Erased now that the route had completed. The bus lifted not in flight, not physically, but in purpose. The child looked up at her. He wasn't confused anymore. Just tired. And older. By years. By understanding. The door closed. The lights dimmed. New coordinates lit across the driver's panel. Another stop. Another child. Another shadow. Kala whispered, "Next passenger." And the wheels began to turn. The wheels didn't rumble or grind. They moved with purpose, gliding across a path that had yet to exist. The moment the words left Kala's lips, "Next passenger," the space around the bus reacted like water forming around a submerged object. It bent, shifted, formed a corridor of dim possibility, paved not by distance, but by proximity to pain. She looked out the window. This time, she didn't see towns. She saw moments. Snapshots of grief, loss, fear. A girl clutching a backpack alone outside a shuttered school. A boy sitting in the back seat of a parked car, watching headlights disappear into rain. A father standing at a kitchen table, repeating a name that wouldn't come back. Each image flickered across the glass, not as memory, but as an invitation. The observer didn't choose who boarded. The route did, and the bus had found its next stop. The lights brightened, not fluorescence, but daylight, seeping in unnaturally from no discernible source. Ahead, a bridge. Concrete, narrow, guardrails broken in places. On the far side, a figure stood. A girl, maybe 10. She wore a winter coat too large for her body and shoes too small for her feet. Her hair hung like draped fabric across her shoulders, unmoving despite the growing wind. She didn't look at the bus. She looked beyond it. Kala felt it before she saw something else on the bridge. A distortion, a ripple, a shadow mimicking the shape of the girl, but reversed, moving slightly before she did, like a bad reflection 1 second too early. The girl stepped forward. So did the shadow. The bus stopped. Doors opened. The girl did not board. She stood at the threshold and pointed to the window, to Kala, and then to seat 5. Kala shook her head. "It's taken," she whispered. But the shadow tilted its head and stepped toward the door. The bus responded. A voice, lower than before, mechanical, resolute. Passenger conflict detected. Observer validation required. A panel rose from the floor beside her seat. Metal, unlabeled. Only a switch. One direction, etched with a circle. The other with an X. Choice. Let the passenger board or deny the stop. Kala looked at the girl. At the shadow beside her. The girl waited, so still, like she'd been here before. Kala reached forward, touched the switch, paused, then flicked it toward the circle. Acceptance. The shadow stopped, flickered, froze, then folded in on itself, silently disappearing like a page burning inward without flame. The girl blinked once, then stepped inside. Seat 7. She sat down, no expression, but her shoulders relaxed. The moment she touched the seat, the bridge vanished. The door closed. Kala whispered, "Conflict resolved." The panel lowered into the floor, and the route resumed. But the bus interior was different now. One of the overhead lights flickered not in dysfunction, but in communication. A code blinked above seat 5. 5L, 5E0, A12. An update. A branch. A new node had been created because of the decision she just made. She had rewritten the cycle again. She wasn't just observing now. She was adapting it. And with every adaptation, the system evolved. Kala looked around. More seats were occupied now. Children who didn't speak, who didn't move, who just rode. Each carried something different. A box, a notebook, a single sock. And each stared at her, not with awe or fear, but expectation. She had become the constant, the one thing that could tether this system to purpose. But she also saw something else. The road ahead no longer curved. It split. 2 paths, each fading into fog. No signs. No clues. No return. The console ahead of her flickered with a final prompt. Choose for them. And below that, Path A, order. Path B, change. She exhaled, closed her eyes, and reached forward. Her hand hovered in the stillness, not because she doubted the choice, but because she understood now that the choice itself was the test. This wasn't about logic or morality, not about right or wrong. It was about what the system had become under her watch, whether it would preserve the cycle or allow it to fracture. She looked again at the console. Path A, order. Path B, change. The words pulsed faintly. Not a pressure invitation. One led back to what had always been. The pattern, the safety of repetition, the silence of unanswered questions. The other? Unwritten, chaotic, human. She touched B, and the moment she did, the bus groaned, not in pain but in resistance. The walls around her shimmered, the seats flexing slightly, the windows fogging as though the very skeleton of the machine had to relearn how to travel. For the first time, Kala felt friction. Not motion, but conflict. The route no longer recognized itself. And in that moment, something inside the system stirred. The voice that had guided her, cold and toneless for so long, shifted. It spoke again. But now it sounded almost uncertain. Change selected. Structural deviation acknowledged. Processing override. This route is no longer verified. Warning. Seat 5 has broken protocol. She didn't flinch. She looked straight ahead. The children didn't react. Not in fear, not in panic. They simply turned, one by one, until every gaze met hers. And in those eyes, relief. Not understanding, not clarity, just the first flicker of freedom. They had never been told there were choices. Only that the bus came. Only that a seat would be found. Only that they would ride, until forgotten. But now, Kala was writing new terms. The world outside changed. The fog didn't part. It rose, and revealed what had always been hidden beneath it, not towns, not roads, but an enormous grid of buses just like hers, moving in unison across places that did not belong to any geography. Some were dark. Some were empty. Some were glowing faintly, still looping. And above it all, an eye. Not mechanical, not divine, just present. Watching, recording. Kala met its gaze through the windshield, and it blinked. Once, like approval, or resignation. A new phrase scrolled across the overhead panel. Autonomy granted, observer unrestricted. Network status, fracturing. Change has entered the system. The girl in seat 7 whispered, the first child to speak since the route began. Are we going home now? Kala turned to her, met her eyes, and said, no, you're going somewhere better, somewhere you choose. The wheels beneath them trembled but didn't resist. Instead, they adapted, accepted, began carving a new route, one that had no map, only intent. And from her seat, for the first time, Kala didn't feel like an observer. She felt like a guide. The tremble beneath the floor wasn't fear. It was transformation. The wheels no longer followed grooved paths left behind by older routes. They etched fresh trails as they moved, threading through possibility like a needle sewing its first original pattern. The world outside the windows no longer flickered with preordained stops. It unfurled. It invited. Kala watched the faces of the children. They were changing too. Not visibly, not aging or speaking, but in stillness. The kind of stillness that came when fear had finally been interrupted by curiosity. That sacred moment of, what now? The console before her dimmed. A new line appeared, delicate and slow. Destination, undefined. And then another. Confirm role transition. Observer, architect. She blinked. A name change. No longer to see, but to shape. The system was offering her something unprecedented. Not to continue the cycle, but to build beyond it. A role no one had filled, because no one had ever survived long enough to be offered it. Kala placed a finger on the console and pressed. Confirm. The bus exhaled. Not literally, but with sensation. The interior stretched gently, walls softening like fabric in warm water. The ceiling arched. The lighting shifted to a muted gold. The windows cleared, not to reveal roads, but skies, oceans, wide places that did not trap. This was no longer a vehicle. It was a vessel, and the children no longer passengers. They were carriers of their own paths. A new door appeared beside her seat. Smaller, wooden, marked not with numbers but a single word. Begin. She opened it and stepped into a corridor that did not exist in the dimensions of the bus. It was lined with mirrors. Each reflected not her face but possibilities of her. Kala as she might have been had she never joined the force. Kala who turned away from the file on bus 47. Kala who had entered the forest but never returned. Each version nodded once solemn, silent, acknowledging what she had done. What none of them had. At the end of the corridor, a desk. Empty. A single object rested atop it. A blank notebook. No lines. No ink. Just endless white pages. A card beside it. The wheel symbol faded. Not erased. Retired. Beneath it, hand-etched. Last observer, first author. She sat. Picked up a pen that hadn't been there a moment before. It was warm. Her fingers remembered it. She placed the tip against the page. And the first line wrote itself. Let them choose. The corridor vanished. She was back on the bus. But it had grown vast. Limitless. Each seat now had its own door. Each child looked toward their own. The bus slowed not because it had to stop, but because the riders had decisions to make. Seat by seat, doors opened. Worlds beyond each. Some quiet, some bright, some familiar. Each built from the thoughts of the one who would walk through. The girl in seat 7 stood, turned to Kala, smiled, and without speaking, stepped through her door. Then another child. Then another. One by one. No one looked back, until only Kala remained. Alone in seat 5. No longer the seat of memory. Now the seat of origin. The bus stopped. For her, one final door. No label. No instruction. Just her own reflection in the glass. And behind her, a message scrawled onto the window. You rewrote the road. Now write what comes after. She stood, turned the handle, and walked through. Light spilled in all directions, not from the sun, not from lamps, but from the space itself, as though the world she had just stepped into was made of illumination. It wasn't brightness that blinded, but clarity that revealed. There was no sound, no floor beneath her feet, no sky overhead, just vastness. Kala didn't fall. She floated. Or perhaps she simply moved without walking, carried not by force but by intent. The notebook was still in her hand, but now it pulsed gently alive. Each beat of its light synchronized with something invisible but present, a rhythm in the fabric of the space itself. She opened it. Page 1 remained. Let them choose. Page 2 was blank. And then the air around her shifted. And the bus, the real one, the vessel, the route that had carried her through cycles and fractures and truths, appeared again. Not as it had been. It no longer had walls or a roof. No wheels. No engine. It had become a kind of bridge suspended in memory, with no beginning or end. And across it walked shadows. Not dark or menacing. Unwritten children. Potential. Choices waiting to be made. Each of them carried something small. A mirror. A card. A notebook. All symbols from the old system. Now tools for what came next. And at the end of the bridge, a platform rose. Kala stood upon it. Her notebook now radiated lines of light that stretched into the air, forming geometric structures, thoughts becoming matter. And across the space, other notebooks lit up, held by other hands. Not children, not victims, other architects. She saw them all around her. Faces unfamiliar but unmistakably shaped by similar journeys. Former observers, one made of smoke and window light, one whose eyes glowed like stars through rain, one who still held their bus number on a tag around their neck. All of them writing, together, a network not of capture, but of creation. For every bus route that had ended, a road was now being drawn forward. And far, far below this tapestry of light and bridges and memory, a town lit up. A real town, not folded or forced. Marrow Point rebuilt, but naturally. With people, with families, with laughter, and without disappearances. Kala smiled for the first time in what felt like entire lifetimes. Because she knew they weren't going back to how things were. There was no return to the old cycle. The wheel had turned its final time. And in its place a pen. Her reflection appeared once more in the space before her. Not mimicking. Not delayed. Just there. A perfect match. And she said to it aloud, "Let the roads remember what we made." The reflection smiled and vanished. The children crossing the bridge ahead of her began to dissolve, each stepping into their own chosen world. Some into families they had imagined. Some into dreams they had drawn. Some into silence, because peace doesn't always need sound. And the final phrase wrote itself across the last page of the notebook. No more observers, only origins. Kala closed the book. And as the light around her dimmed to twilight, soft, tender, earned, she stepped down from the platform. Not to walk away, but to walk with them. The door behind her, the one she had first opened when she chose to sit in seat 5, closed. Quiet. Forever. The door behind her, the one she had first opened when she chose to sit in seat 5, closed. Quiet. Forever. The sound of the door closing wasn't an end. It was a seal. Quiet. Final. Sacred. A covenant signed not with ink, but with transformation. It echoed softly through the layers of reality she'd crossed, through the mirrors that once watched her, through the forgotten hallways and vanished streets and hollowed buses that had carried so many before her. But those echoes no longer carried fear. They carried release. Kala stood on solid ground now, not the bridge of memory, not the shifting corridors of the system, but earth, real and rooted. Grass beneath her boots, trees overhead, wind carrying birdsong. And in the distance, a town. Lights in windows, people laughing, dogs barking, the unremarkable music of a life untouched by the machinery of forgotten routes. She looked down at the notebook in her hands. Its cover had changed. No longer red, now slate gray. A soft spiral embossed in the center. Not a wheel, A seed. Inside, every page was blank once again. Because it didn't need to remember the past anymore. It needed to hold what came next. She slipped it into her coat and began to walk. There was no road, just a direction. She passed a wooden sign hammered to an old tree. It read, Marrow Point, population 162. Underneath, someone had scribbled in marker, everyone accounted for. She smiled, because she believed it. No child lost. No names erased. No shadows waiting at bus stops for doors that never opened. She passed a school. The bell rang. Not 4 notes. Just one, clear and harmless. Children ran into the yard, faces flushed with joy, backpacks bouncing. Not a single one looked back to see if someone was watching. Because they didn't need to. She reached a bench at the edge of the park. Saturday. Watched, and then heard a voice beside her. Soft, young. Miss, do you have the time? Calla looked at her watch. It had started ticking again. 11:14 a.m. She answered, You're right on time. The boy nodded, satisfied, ran back to join the others. And behind her, on a far-off hill that only she could see, the last bus stood still. No driver, no schedule, no passengers, just a monument. To what once was, to what she'd rewritten. Wind rolled through the trees, soft and distant, like the whisper of old wheels turning their final time. And in the hush of it all, one last message stirred through the air so faint it could have been her own thought. Well done, architect. Kaya closed her eyes. Let the wind carry her breath. Let the world exist without her holding it up. The cycle was broken. The observer's chair was empty, and the road forward belonged to those who would choose it. For the first time in all the roads she'd walked, Kaya Morin was simply home.